My name's Henry Leese. I'm an emeritus professor in the Hull York Medical School. Most of my scientific career was at the University of York. And I happened to be in York University Library one day, and on the shelves there were new books, and there was this book called The Fallopian Tube. I opened it, and there was this picture of a cross-section of a fallopian tube, and it looked just like an intestine. And I thought, wow, this is interesting. It's much more interested in the gut. I'd like to work on this topic. And I worked on that again for, I suppose, 7 or 8 years, and quite a few papers were published. But then I decided I needed something different scientifically, and I knew by then where I wanted to go, which was the laboratory of John Biggers in Harvard Medical School, Boston, USA. And I turned up, and he then said the words that changed my scientific career, indeed my life. Because he said, well, you're only here for quite a short period of time, I think it was about 6 months. I suggest you work on the early embryo. So I started work in John's lab. I then came back to the UK, and I was working quite happily on mouse embryos, and I had this telephone call, totally unexpected, and it was Bob Edwards. And we're talking about the mid-1980s now, so Louise Brown, the first baby, had only been born quite recently. You don't expect to be rung up by Bob, but he did. And he's seen a paper of mine looking at pyruvate and glucose consumption by eggs and early embryos in the mouse. And he said, could we work together to study spare eggs and human embryos, spare human material? And we did go ahead, and it was successful. As we moved from the basic profiling, we then started to look at, can this metabolism of an embryo measured non-invasively predict its subsequent survival and capacity to develop, either to the blastocyst stage, the last stage of reimplantation development, or to give a pregnancy? And the answer we got, we'd expected the best embryos to have the highest metabolism, to be the most active. The answer we were getting was it wasn't like that at all. If anything, it was the other way around, and those that we tended to call quiet seemed to have the best possibility of developing both in a dish and giving a pregnancy. And I call this the quiet embryo hypothesis. As with all hypotheses, we've modified it slightly to take account of some criticism. Instead of just considering noisy and quiet embryos, we looked at the whole distribution of activities. And we now think, rather than just the two categories, quiet and active, we have a whole spectrum, and we'll pursue this line. I think there are real problems with embryo culture. There are 8 or 10 standard media used. In the really good trials that have compared these media, no difference has been found, really, in these different media. And that, to me, says you need more research. I think what is required is a major trial involving different countries, multinational, with multi-centres involved. I think that the early phase of pregnancy, the first week and around about conception, is especially sensitive to environmental effects that may lead to some problems in later life. The evidence is very strong and persuasive, but not yet conclusive. But a lot of people are moving into this field. It's become a very lively topic. I love to wander around art galleries. The great thing about that is the distinction with science. In science, when I do something, I think most of the time we're looking for a consensus and agreement, though we don't always agree, but it's moving in that direction. And in science, I expect to be judged and questioned and justify what I've said. In art, I can think whatever I like about that piece of music or that piece of art. And it's a great relief or escape from some of the rigours of science.